Hello, I'm Alistair McIntyre, and I just wanted to tell you about a new website I'm building. The site is electriccanadian.com, and it's intended to be a major resource for people wanting to learn something about the history of Canada and the Canadians. The background to start why I started the site is that I'm the web publisher for electricscotland.com, which is in fact the largest history site for the history of Scotland and the Scots at home and abroad on the web. It's a huge resource. I actually came to Canada about 7 years ago now to do research on the Scots in Canada. And so that meant that I built up a fairly massive collection of historical material on Canada, from which I was extracting the information about the Scots. Now, just a few months ago, I read an article, and it was basically saying that Canadian children know little or nothing of their own country's history. And I just thought that was a huge shame. And the more I thought about it, I thought, you know, well, I could maybe help to do something about that. In that, having built the Electric Scotland site to be such a massive resource, I thought I could probably build a Canadian resource for Canada's history. And so basically that was the idea was born. So I thought, well, I'll go see if I can get myself a domain, and I did try to get Electric Canada to match with Electric Scotland, but unfortunately someone out there in the world has got Electric Canada, is doing nothing with it, just sitting on it, and all attempts at contacting the owners have failed. So that being the case, instead of getting Electric Canada, I've got electriccanadian.com, and that's the site. Now, I will say that this is going to take some years to build, because obviously you can't put a huge amount of historical material up unless you actually spend a lot of time doing that. But I've already got a lot of information up, and the reason I've got a lot of information up already is that I already had a lot under Electric Scotland, because clearly, having got the histories, I was digging into those histories to extract the Scottish histories for the Scottish side. But nevertheless, I have the full histories of Canada. So that's given me a big jump start to the site. So even though it's only been going for a few months, it's already got a lot of information out. And this is what I want to tell you a little bit about. When you go to the site, you'll see I've got a one-line menu at the top. First link is history. When you actually click on history, that's going to give you the general history of Canada. Now, the concept here in this section is that the very first link I offer you is the history of Canada. Now, I'm thinking that as people don't know the history of Canada, I thought, well, putting up a 10-volume history is probably not going to be that helpful, because no one's going to read them, or very few will try and read 10 volumes. So what I found here is an abridged history of Canada in 1 volume. And in fact, that gives you the main highlights of the history of Canada. And I think myself it's a very good starting point to get this general idea of the history of the whole of Canada. But underneath that, I've got the history of Canadian provinces. And in there, you'll find every province listed. And the idea is eventually to bring you a full history of each of the provinces. Now, right now, I do have some history up on all of the provinces. Not all of them have a full history, some of them maybe have bits. But for example, if I went in the history of Alberta, I do in fact have a 2-volume history up there on the history of Alberta. And several other provinces have full histories up already. When you come to somewhere like Ontario, I don't yet have a full history of Ontario, but I do have histories of bits of Ontario up. So every single one of these sections will have something for you to read already. And included within the Canadian provinces, I've also got a section for the history of the First Nations. And again, I have material up in there already, but a lot more will come. I mean, if I give an example, when I go to the history of the First Nations, what I have up already is books by John McDougall. Now, his father actually was a pioneering missionary to the native Indian people over the Alberta kind of area of Canada. And John McDougall obviously grew up there. In fact, I'm told that he spoke 2 Indian languages before he spoke English. But he wrote 6 books about growing up, and this is a time when there was no railroads, no real roads either, and the communications were very basic, so you had to travel either on foot, by horse, by dog sleigh, or indeed by canoe down the rivers. So these are fascinating insights into those early days of Alberta. But because a lot of his work was with the First Nations people, clearly there's a lot of good information in there about them. And he does have one, forgive my pronunciation here, but it's something like Wapimoods Tush, or White Buffalo, the hero of 100 battles, the tale of life in Canadians' Great West during the early years of the last century. And it's about an Indian leader, about him growing up and becoming the leader of the tribe. So that, I thought, made a really interesting book. I've also got the sketch of the Esquimaux. This is found in the territory of Boothia Felix, if that's pronounced correctly. But that was extracted from a book which was a narrative of the second voyage in search of the Northwest Passage, and it was basically meeting the Eskimo Inuit tribes for the first time, and these were impressions gathered. I've also got a book about Canadian savage folk, which purports to be some of the native tribes of Canada. We've got our treaty history, which is actually, if you're in Ontario, you may know it as the Walpole Island, their area. And I've also got a really good story about, he's a person called Zebedee. He's basically an Inuit half-breed, but he's a Scottish half-breed as it happens. And he wrote a story about searching for his Scottish grandfather. But within that, he tells you a bit about his own people and the challenges that they faced, and also his search for the other half of his family. So that's a really fascinating account. I think it's about 30 chapters, and the last chapter is a whole bundle of pictures, which are fascinating in themselves. So as you can see, while there's more to do on that, I've already got a good start. If I was going to Ontario, which as I say, I don't have a full history of Ontario up, but for example, I've got the Pioneers of Old Ontario, a full book there. Most of these are full books, by the way. I've got the history of the county of Bruce, reminiscences of Cromer and Canada, which is in the kind of Chatham area of Ontario. I've got a book about the town of Caledonian. Also, I've got the history of Kent, county of Kent. I've got some commemorative biographical records of people in Kent. I've got 100 years history of St Andrew's Society of Toronto. We've got pioneer life in Zorro. And there's more there, in fact. So as you can see, there is already a considerable amount of information up, and I think a lot of it is very readable. I will also be doing, in that particular section, some of the histories of ethnic histories. I have obviously got the Scots in Canada up because I actually pinched that from my Electorate Scotland site. So that's already up, but obviously I'd like to do the ethnic groups like the Dutch, the Italians, French, obviously. I'd like to cover Ukrainians, the Poles, the Chinese, and so forth. I haven't had much luck in contacting the embassies of these countries because I hope that they might point me to local organisations which might provide me with more information, but the ones I've written to so far unfortunately haven't replied. So we'll just have to see how we get on. But that's the intention, is to bring you some of the ethnic histories. I mean, that's the one big difference between Scotland and Canada, in that Scotland really developed on its own and wasn't known as an immigrant nation, whereas Canada is very much an immigrant nation. People came from everywhere else, apart from obviously the First Nations people, but they came from everywhere else in the world to build Canada. So I think we need to explore these ethnic histories. So that's under the history section. The next one is the makers of Canada. And there's two reasons for doing the makers of Canada. One is there is actually in existence, I think it's 21 volumes, in which these volumes were produced to tell you the story of the main makers of Canada. These were the big people like Champlain, Bishop Lavet, Count Frontenac. I mean, the early ones were obviously French. Then you came to William Lyon Mackenzie and so on. So the idea is to put all these biographies up of these great people that helped to build Canada to where it is today. That is again work in progress, but I've got maybe 15 of those biographies are already up, and I'll get the rest of them up pretty shortly. But also under that, I will be building some other biographies of significant Canadians as I find them, and so you might say that's like a biographical section for some of the major players in Canadian history. Then we come to pioneering. This will be a kind of cross flow of information, but basically I think it's important for us to realize what the pioneers went through to build Canada to what it is today. I mean, it wasn't an easy life being a pioneer, but by golly, they built the country. And so I'm wanting to try to explore the pioneering aspect, to try to teach you what it was like. Now, I've got a sequence of books up already on this. For example, I've got books of John McDougall. Now, the reason for doing that is that his father was actually a pioneering missionary to the local First Nations people in the Alberta area of Canada. And John himself was obviously born and brought up there, but it's told the story that before he could speak English, he actually spoke 2 Indian languages first, because he used to play with the local Indian kids, because there were very few, in quotes, white people there at the time. So this is at a time when there were no railroads or roads, and no communication by telegraph or telephone lines or anything like that. So it's very much in the early days of the country, and he's writing about growing up, his experiences. I mean, they would travel by foot, by horse, by dog sleigh, by canoe, and so all of these experiences give you a flavour of what it was like growing up in those early days. And then we have, like, I've got some penned pictures of early pioneer life in Upper Canada. I've got a really good book. It's actually a novel, but it's very much based on fact. It's about the McGregors. And this is really a book about a pioneering family, how they arrived in Canada and how they went through the process of settling. And the main person in the book is obviously a son, and how he earned some money for himself and eventually bought his own farm, and how they progressed and got married and had a family and all of that kind of thing. And there are other books like that which are again are already up on the site, so you can read all of those, and I will add others as I come across them. I try not to duplicate things. Like, for example, I'm trying to find a book I know I've got somewhere, just can't find it, about settling on the prairies, because that was a different aspect of settling to when you were settling in the eastern part of Canada, where you were clearing the trees. So that's the kind of things I'm wanting to bring you and give you a flavour of how people settled. Now, after the pioneers, I've got a section for the armed forces, because one thing I did learn when I was doing the research on the Scots is that the various Canadian regiments, a lot of them were born out of the Scottish regiments that served over here, but they did amazing work for the country. Right now I've got the Seaforth Highlanders in Canada, and that's been kind of interesting. I think it's that was a talk actually given, I think it was at Guelph University by Neil Fraser. So that was kind of interesting. But I've got also Over the Top with the 25th, and that kind of takes in the Vimy Ridge era of the First World War. So that's a fascinating account. But I've also done the Royal Northwest Mounted Police. There's a book up about them, and also another book about Corporal Cameron of the Northwest. Again, these are to try to give you a flavour of what serving in those kind of regiments was like. And I have a book up about the Canadian Mounted Police, Royal Canadian Mounted Police. And also another book is Trooper and Redskin in the Far Northwest. So again, there's a lot of really good books there up already that you can learn something about it. I would be doing a lot more on the Canadian regiments, however, so a lot more to come there. Then we've got a section on what I call industry and transport. This is where I'm hoping to bring you some of the history of the various industrial sectors and commercial sectors of Canada, but it's going to be a little bit of a challenge kind of getting some of that information, but I'm hunting now for that. But transport was massive, and I do have three particularly good books, or two very good books. One is Ocean to Ocean, which is the expedition through Canada, which is the initial survey for the Canadian Pacific Railroad. But I've also got a book called When the Steel Goes Through, and this is actually of an individual who helped to build the Canadian Pacific Railroad, mostly in the West, but he did also work in Ontario and so forth. So that gives you a flavour of the actual work that went on. And he does talk about all the ethnic groups that he met when he was building, because literally every ethnic group was involved in building the railroad. We've also got a story of the history of the Hudson's Bay Company, which was massive. And I've now got some information up about minerals and mining industry of Canada, and I've got an overview of the agricultural market, which I got from Canadian Statistics as it happens. But I hope to bring you a lot more within that section. I've then got a religious section. Again, part of the reason for doing religion is that it was actually it was remarkably important to the early pioneers, the established churches, when they came to Canada. And so I think it's well worth looking at the work that they did. I mean, for example, when I'm talking about the John McDougall books, like his father was one of those missionaries that went out into the West and tried to convert the First Nations to Christianity, but they were part of opening up the whole country as well. I've got the life of James Robertson up, who was the missionary superintendent in the Northwest Territories. He was an amazing man that not only opened up many churches but also schools. So again, I hope to bring you some more stories of religion in Canada. I've then got what I call lifestyle, but to be perfectly honest, that's going to be like a catch-all section for anything else I can find. I did find with Electric Scotland when I built it that I had to, after maybe a few years of working on it, I had to rebuild the menu because some of the menus were so huge that they deserved to have their own menu items. So the lifestyle section may well change as I get more and more information in. But again, I've got some interesting ones up. Like, for example, when I was doing the Makers of Canada series, I found a book about songs of the Makers of Canada, so I thought that was kind of interesting. We've also got the Great Canadian Tune Book. And funny enough, that came about because I was staying with my friends in Kimberley in British Columbia, and basically their family from Glasgow came over because his son was graduating from high school, and so the whole family flew over from Glasgow for the graduation, and I kind of stayed to take some photographs of it and kind of document it. But at night in the pub, we got to, as you know, you had a few drinks, you get to singing a few songs, and because all the Scots were there, we're all singing Scottish songs. And we got a call from the back saying, "Don't you guys know any Canadian songs?" And we had to admit that we didn't, but we said, "If you know any, keep singing and we'll sing along with you." But the only one that they came up with was "Oh Canada," which is great. I mean, that's fine, but that was the only one that anyone knew. And so I was commenting about that in my Canadian site, and it was a guy, Doug Ross, who was a kind of regular visitor, said, "I can probably help you," and he sent me in about 3 emails giving me resources for where to find songs, Canadian songs. And so I compiled that into an article and put it up on the website. So the Great Canadian Tune Book is where you get tons of links to Canadian song resources. I've also picked up one which is Canadians Do It Better, which actually came from Maclean's magazine. I hope they'll forgive me for lifting it, but it was a wee bit of a celebration of Canada Day, and I thought that would be kind of interesting for people to read. I've also got some facts about Canada there. I've also got a book about the actually it's a series of videos about the Northwest Passage. It's one of the Scottish comedians, Billy Connolly, which some of you may know, but he travelled the Northwest Passage route, and so I felt that that maybe helped people get an idea of what the country looks like. And obviously he met a lot of characters when he was going, so I just basically put links to those videos on YouTube. I've got a little section where I study which is Canadian humour, and I've also got a very nice book which is Romantic Canada. This was a book that was eventually published in 1922, but it's written in the 1800s. And that book is quite fascinating because the author, Edith Watson, she actually travelled shore to shore in Canada and wrote stories about the people she met and the communities that she visited. So that's a bit of a fascinating insight into some of the ways that the early pioneers were settling and living at the time. And again, we'll be adding more, because hopefully I'll get some music and other things into this lifestyle section. The only other thing up there is what's new. If I'm putting up new information, I'll try always to add it to the what's new section. One of the things I'm tending to do with this Electric Canadian site is working on a book, and once the whole book is complete on the site, I'll then announce it and make a link available. Whereas on Electric Scotland, I tend to do it chapter by chapter. I may go chapter to chapter eventually on the because I know people don't have a whole ton of time to read stuff on the web, but I wanted to try to get a decent basic body of work up quickly, so that's why I've been working on whole books rather than just going chapter by chapter. But again, in the what's new, the last 3 things that were up were our treaty history, which is about the Walpole Island Native Indians, Romantic Canada, and also the Zebedee one, The Search for His Scottish Roots. So say right now I'm working on the history of Toronto and the county of York, so that'll be the next one that will be going up. And the final link is contact us, and certainly I would be very appreciative if anyone can contribute anything to the site. For example, the Canadian Tourism Commission were not able to help in any shape or form, and none of the provinces are willing to help the tourists, so I would love to try to put up a nice picture gallery of Canada. The reason I say that is that before I came to Canada, my only knowledge, for example, of Alberta was what I got at school in geography class. And all I really remember there was it was Saskatchewan, Manitoba and Alberta. They were called the Prairie Provinces. So it fixed in my mind has always been the fact that Alberta must be flat as a pancake and grows wheat. I don't remember ever seeing a picture of Alberta, ever. So from that point of view, you might say for some 45 years, that's been my opinion of Alberta. So why would I want to go to a flat place that grows wheat? Basically, I wouldn't. I have no interest at all. So I've never even bothered looking to see what Alberta might actually look like. It was only when doing research on my Electric Scotland site that I realised that the country is just amazing. Parts of Alberta, because it's a huge province. And I just thought to myself, well, for 45 years, Alberta wasn't even my radar. And that's where I think, personally I think, the tourism people have got it entirely wrong. They focus on their own website, but why would I ever go to a flat place to grow sweets tourism site? Simple fact is, I would never go there. So they're never going to be able to tell me about their province. And that's, I say, where I think the tourism people have got it entirely wrong. They need to spend half of their money at least on getting their content onto other websites, not just theirs. But I've said that for years, but unfortunately the tourism people don't think like that. They are stupid people, ignorant people, totally, well, you know, I get a wee bit fed up at times that people should have better vision, to be honest. We're only tinkering on the edges in tourism. There should be a ton more people coming to Canada. So, anyway, but if you've got pictures to donate that can tell a story of a province or part of a province, I'd love to hear from you. If you've got your own stories about pioneering days with your family or anything like that, please send them in. If you have been working on histories of any parts of Canada, or you happen to be in industry or commerce and have information on one of your own sectors that you work in, love to hear from you. I mean, at the end of the day, I'm a one-man business, so my time is necessarily limited. So the more people that can help, the better we can make the site. So, but I hope in any event that you'll really enjoy visiting the site and learning all the stuff that's going on. I mean, I can tell you that a lot of these books that I put up are just a great read. I mean, it's a kind of one that you'd kind of like to sit down in an armchair and just read. But I think they're great. A lot of the information is just fascinating and great, and I would certainly encourage you to browse through and dip in as you get the chance. So there you go. Go to www.electriccanadian.com, and I hope you'll enjoy it, and I hope you'll want to get involved with us. Look forward to seeing you and look forward to hearing from you. Thanks for listening.